Hey everyone, it's Triple Mango Threat or Ashley, and today I'm talking with Matthew from Magical Hacker on Twitter. So, Matthew, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I used to do content, doing some videos, mostly gameplay videos, but also some theory and strategizing on the topic of Commander. And maybe about a half a year ago, I quit, but that's okay. I'm still here. I have a voice. I like talking and kind of inspiring other people to think about Commander a little differently. So I'm excited to talk about this element of Commander with you today. And yeah, it's exciting.
So, the topic we wanted to cover was why it's a good idea to pick a bad commander. So, let's jump right into it. Matthew, can you give us a couple of your thoughts?
Yes. So we have to think about the game of Commander as starting a little bit earlier than we normally think of. Normally, people think the game of Commander starts as soon as you sit down at a table and you're talking to those people. But really, it starts way before that. When you sit down and you start to make your deck, you're already playing. And the reason I say that is because those choices you make in the deck building process are going to affect the gameplay. They're going to affect how likely it is that you win or you lose. And this is kind of obvious. I think a lot of people can be like, okay, I see where you're coming from. The game starts at the deck building, right? It doesn't start just when you start to play. It starts before that. It starts when you build the deck.
Right.
So with that in mind, what elements of deck building are going to make it easy to win or make it hard to win? I think that's something that we want to try to work towards, right? When you're playing the game, you're making decisions. How am I going to win this game? And how am I going to lose this game? I think that the difference between that and deck building is there's also this added element of you have to know what is considered fair and what's not considered fair. Because at the deck building stage, if all I'm trying to do is win, then I build a CEDH deck, right? That's my goal, and that's going to help me win the most.
Yeah.
But that's something that's obvious. I mean, I'm sure you've probably told your audience this many, many times. But building a CEDH deck and then playing in non-CEDH groups, it's definitely a bad idea
Yeah.
It's just not a great idea. So I usually think of it as you have to know your limitations, the parameters. And then from those parameters, you can then go to the deck building and figure out, what's the best strategy or what's a good strategy to win the game. So if you had to put yourself in that situation of deciding the parameters, what were some common things that you would be saying for a non-CEDH game?
Well, so when it comes to casual commander, I really don't care about the mana cost of things anymore. So from what I have, the short amount of games I have played in competitive commander is that the mana cost, and if it's instant speed, that really depends if you're going to put it in your deck or not. And if it's a sorcery speed for me, I don't care. If it's a good card, in my opinion, then I'll put it in there.
And that's one of the beautiful things about Commander is, unlike other formats where there is, a set of rules for how you solve it, including CEDH, casual Commander or non-CEDH Commander, it's up to you. How you solve it, that's your solution. And what might be good for my solution might be bad for your solution, and vice versa. So I think that's a great disclaimer to start off with. What we're going to talk about, this is going to be very relative to our own solutions to Commander, how we solve the format. And, it might be a bad idea for somebody else, but I'll talk about why I have this as my solution, and you'll talk about why you have certain things as your solution. Yeah. As kind of a stepping point for other people to maybe think about their solution in a different way, because some solutions are better than other solutions, and so I think that's an element to keep in mind. But kind of going back to the topic of once you have the parameters and knowing what you're trying to do, you then want to make decisions that are going to give you the best chances of winning. And kind of going back to that previous example of CDH, that's an idea of there's no holds barred, right? I'm trying to go balls to the wall, try to get this as easily as I can, trying to go for the win, and nothing else matters. Right. And that's fine. People who play CEDH, I have nothing against them. I haven't played CEDH before, but I feel like I probably have played against CEDH decks without knowing it.
Yeah.
Back when I wasn't really aware of what the format was like, I probably played against some CEDH decks without realizing it. But anyways, you've got to make decisions that are going to help you win. And if you decide, for a specific reason, I'm making a decision that's going to make it harder for me to win, just because I enjoy that's fine. Let's say somebody really enjoys playing Scrambleverse, right? And they say, this is not really going to help me win, but man, I just have such a blast playing it.
Yeah.
That might be a decision you make, and you're saying, yeah, I'm not going to be winning as much. Or maybe you're saying, yeah, I'm trying to synergize with Scrambleverse, make my deck as good as it can to make Scrambleverse better for me than for other people. Maybe playing a lot of instant sorceries, and so Scrambleverse, where it's mixing up the permanents, you don't have that many permanents to lose. And so there might be things that you do like this, where you're taking a card and you're making it into a way to win. But what does it have to do with the choice of the commander? How do you decide what commander you want to play?
So I actually set aside 3 commanders I wanted to actually mention, and if we don't mention them all, it's okay. But Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs. This is a card I got in a commander deck in 2016, the Saskia one.
Mm-hmm.
And it says whenever an opponent's creature would attack you, if they don't pay 3 mana, then you get a 3/3 token, but that's for each creature that they're attacking you with. And so somebody would write this off and say, this is a weird commander, and it is.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's a bad commander.
Right.
And so you could build this deck as a force combat deck. So yes, please swing at me, and you're probably not going to pay 3 mana to protect those tokens I'm making. And then you put in Warstorm Surge, so I'm going to Lightning Bolt you if you don't pay 3 mana for each creature.
That's actually a really smart idea, and I'm kicking myself for the fact that I didn't think of it. And I'll tell you, a long time ago, I had a Queen Marquesa deck that was similar in its strategy, making somebody else the monarch so that people are attacking each other, not so much attacking me. And I think this is a great comparison. Queen Marquesa, very, very popular. I think she's still in the top 200 on EDHREC. I'll take a look in just a second.
Yeah.
And Kazul, I don't even think he probably reaches the top 500, top 600 probably. So I'll take a look here as well. But if we compare these two, and I were a player thinking, I want to get myself the best chances to win, it obviously seems like a better choice to pick Queen Marquesa, right? Why would I pick Kazul? What benefit is that going to give to me? I'm having 1/3 the number of colors, and I'm losing black, which a lot of players think is way more important than red. And white, they're probably not so... They don't feel like that's so necessary. But losing black and only having a mono red deck, people are going to say that's obviously a bad idea. But I would say the opposite. I think if you had to pick between the two, and let's say I'm picking between the two, I'm 100% going with Kazul over Queen Marquesa.
Really?
There's also, yes, 100%. And I'll tell you exactly why I think this is going to make it way easier to win the game. But before we do that, I wanted to just mention a quick thing. Because if you're playing a deck that has, I want to say the name of it is Taunting something. There's a red card, a red creature that you can tap it and make target player have to attack with all their creatures on their next turn, or like whenever possible until your next turn.
Okay.
It's like Goblin Diplomats, I think is the name of the card.
Yep, that's it.
Hey, I got it. And so tapping that would be great. But if you had a propaganda effect, which Kazul seems like he's kind of like a propaganda, right? You either choose whether or not you're paying the 3, or whatever creature you're attacking with is going to get blocked by a 3/3 token. So it's kind of like a propaganda effect. But there's a key difference. So when you force opponent to attack, this is one of those like lawyery, like intricate rules things. A lot of, you probably already know this, but for people in the audience who don't know this, when you attack with a creature, because you have to, thanks to like a Goblin Diplomats or something, if the person you're attacking has a propaganda, you can choose to not pay the 2 mana, and then that creature won't be attacking that combat, which feels kind of counterintuitive. You would think, can't they just attack somebody else that doesn't have propaganda? But unfortunately, that is how the rules work, where if you attack with the propaganda, with a creature that has to attack, and then you choose to not pay the 2 mana, that creature doesn't have to attack anymore. But with Kazul, I know it's kind of crazy, right? So with Kazul, it doesn't matter. If you choose to not pay the 3, that creature is technically still attacking. So it doesn't get removed from combat. So if you force creatures to attack and you have a Kazul, they either choose to attack you and have to either pay the 3 mana, or you get a token which could block that creature potentially, or they have to choose somebody else. So Kazul is a better propaganda if you're playing a deck that's forcing opponents to attack. which is why
Right.
I had not thought of this earlier. This is what I was kicking myself for, because when you mentioned Kazul being used for a deck that's forcing opponents to attack, I'm thinking, that's such a great idea because of the way Kazul synergizes with it better than with propaganda effects. So, cool idea. Let's talk about why I think Queen Marquesa is a worse option than Kazul for most players and for me personally.
Okay.
At the beginning of the game, and again, this is after the deck building stage, at the beginning of the game, when you sit down with your opponents have no idea what's in your hand. They have no idea what's in your deck. They don't even have any idea of what's on your board potentially later in the game, because you currently have nothing on the board. Your hand is completely, hidden. The only thing they know about your hand is how many cards you have in it. The single element of your deck that they'll know is your commander. And I want to put a little bit of like an asterisk here, because some players like to have a discussion before the game begins. What is in your deck? And if you're one of those players, that's fine. I think one of the things that will end up causing is it will cause a little bit of friction with some players, just because some players, they want to have a deck that is unique and does something new that people haven't seen before. And if you tell them what your new unique thing is, then you kind of lose that luster, that effect of, wow, that's such a cool deck. And even if you do play that deck one time, they didn't get to see all the things the deck can do. So even from game to game to game with the same players, explaining the deck before the game begins, I think kind of can make some players feel like they lose that element of the excitement, the gameplay. But again, that's just an asterisk here. And if you want to, we can go into a little bit more on what a different rule zero that I recommend is, either in this video or in another video, if you decide that the talk today was okay. But anyways, so you sit down. The only thing opponents will see is your commander if you do that type of rule zero where you're not talking about everything that's in your deck. So what does that mean? Well, opponents are always going to be making decisions based on threat assessment. Unlike in 1v1, where you have an opponent and you have a player, you have multiple players at the table. And so everything you do, not only you have to decide, do I want to do it now or later? You also have to decide, where am I going to do it to? Who am I going to do it to? So in 1v1, if you can attack with a creature, you attack with the creature. You're trying to win the game. You're trying to kill your opponent. But in a multiplayer game, just because you can attack with a player doesn't mean that that's the best thing to do. Because you might have a player sitting to your left or to your right, and you're saying, I want to attack them, and they have no blockers. But then you have to remember, well, it doesn't matter just that they have no blockers. Another question is, do other people have attackers? And so there's an element here where you're having to decide a second layer. And kind of notably, this is why some players who are really good at Modern, really good at Legacy or Pioneer, when they go to Commander, they feel like, man, they cannot win the game, and this game sucks. They hate this format. There's that element of difference, because there are some people who, in their mind, being scary, doing the most efficient, effective thing every turn, meaning that wins the game, that's a huge element of gameplay. And in Commander, that's not the case. Doing the scariest thing, being the most efficient, may actually cause you to lose the game, because you got three opponents at the table. One of the fastest ways and easiest ways to lose the game is to be the archenemy, which you do by being the most threatening. So going back to our example here, you have your opponents at the table. You've shown your commander. Everybody's shown their commander. If your commander is Queen Marquesa and everybody else is something that people haven't seen before, or they don't see it often enough, or they look at that commander and they go, okay, that's not a very good card, right? You're going to be the archenemy starting from turn one. And this is the element of this. This is the part of the game you actually don't want to be the archenemy. This is the most important, because this is also the part of the game where people have the most cards in hand. So they have the most potential, if you will. They have a lot of cards in hand that can be board wipes, spot removal, and even creatures that can be attacking later on in the game. So when you look at Commander from a strategic perspective, when do you think it's best to try to get your game plan online? Earlier in the game or later in the game?
So I've seen the Command Zones episode of does playing Sol Ring make you lose the game, and I think they said yes, if I remember right. Yep. So I still cast Sol Ring on turn one if I can do it.
Yeah.
And I think by turn 6 or 7, that's whenever you should start popping off.
Yeah.
And I mean, if your deck does earlier, then that's fine. But that's whenever I feel like I can start getting away with things, and it might be too late for some opponents.
Yeah, I think that's a very. I think a lot of people would agree with you on that one. You said that if you can pop off earlier, that's fine, and I agree with you. If you can pop off earlier, then go for it, right? There is the element of maybe sometimes sandbagging to wait to see if an opponent can answer you. But I want to take this conversation a step further. So we talk about when you can, or how your deck is able to play out. But another question is, when do you want to aim for? Like, when you're building your deck, what is you're saying? I want to aim for this turn, plus or minus a couple of turns. Do I want to build my deck and say, in goldfishing, I want my deck to win on turn 5, and if it takes me a little bit longer in the real, world, that's fine. I would actually say that's the opposite way that you should go. And I hope this, you've probably played the game Mario Kart Double Dash, right, on the GameCube.
Yes.
Very, very popular. And I keep coming back to this game because I think this is one of the things that has really shaped, believe it or not, my approach to multiplayer gameplay. In Mario Kart, for those of you that haven't played, there's a couple of items that you can get throughout the race. And so you're trying to end up in first place, obviously. But at the same time, you have items that can help equalize the difference between the first place and the last place. And there are elements in the gameplay that do that kind of help equalize. So you've got simple items like the mushrooms, which can speed you up. But you've also got more complicated items. There's 2 that are really kind of important in my mind, the lightning bolt and the blue shell. And they may have official names that I don't know about, but there's the blue shell and the lightning bolt. The lightning bolt, if you're in last place, you can get the lightning bolt as an item, and that allows you to make everybody else in the game small. You strike them with lightning and they get really small, and their speed goes down. They can't really gain speed, I think. I'm not 100% sure about how all the mechanics works. But regardless, it helps the person in last place, and it doesn't help anybody else. It makes everybody else kind of suffer for it. The blue shell is another similar item, except it does help almost everybody else except for the person in first place. The blue shell will fly through the map, find whoever's in first place, and hit them with a big explosion. So if you're in second place and you happen to be close to that first place, you will get hit by the explosion too. But that blue shell will only really affect the first place racer in most situations. They'll get hit with a bomb, their speed goes back down to whatever it starts off at. They don't have the acceleration like they did before. They kind of lose all their items. They, if they're near the side of a map, they'll get thrown off the side. They have to come back onto the map. And it's just it's really bad for the first place. So the reason I bring up this analogy is because I think that's what Commander's really like. You've got 4 people in the race, right? But whoever's in last place and whoever's in the third place and second place, the 3 of them are all looking at whoever looks to be the most likely to win. And they're going to be using their spot removal, their counter spells, their combat steps, all to try to make sure that player doesn't win. Because if they don't do that, that player will win, right? I mean, that's how the threat assessment works. So from turn 0, if you put yourself in that position of I'm the arch enemy, I'm the scariest one at the table, you're already fighting an uphill battle. Whereas if you decide instead to put yourself in second place or third place, right, not to be the scariest one at the table, but be able to have a good deck that can do stuff, that's going to give you the easiest way to get to the table. So one thing I like to do kind of in a political way that may help this solution, right? Everybody's solution is a little different. Maybe I do things that will make my solution better, is I always like to point out the commanders at the table, and I always like to point out who I think is the arch enemy at the table. It does take a little bit of honesty, because if you are the scariest, pointing out somebody else it's going to be kind of obvious that you're trying to deflect. So I would say, if you were the scariest, be honest about it and say, guys, I mean, you guys have to attack me, and I'm rooting for you. I want you to take me down. I'm rooting for the underdogs. And I think that honesty is a big key element. But if you point out, hey, that person's playing Queen Marquesa, she's number 7. Let me look it up. I said I was going to look it up. I'm going to do that now. So we were talking about Kazul. We were talking about Queen Marquesa. So would you mind, I don't know if you have them pulled up. If you don't, that's okay. But if you have Queen Marquesa pulled up, would you mind reading off that commander as well, just so that people kind of know about what that commander does too?
So Queen Marquesa, this is rank number 15.
Wow.
Okay. She costs 1 red, white, black. She's a 3/3 human assassin with death touch and haste. When she enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. At the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent is the monarch, put a 1/1 black assassin creature token with death touch and haste onto the battlefield.
So I guess the idea behind her is if you aren't the monarch, then it gives you a benefit. You can make a really good token. Death touch tokens, in my opinion, are some of the best blockers. People really do not want to attack if they know that their creature that they spent a card for is going to be killed in combat by a death touch token. And so that was kind of the way I had built the deck too. So Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs, does cost 1 more mana, 5 mana. But I think all of these elements are kind of pointing to Kazul being, in a lot of ways, a worse commander just looking at the stats, but a better commander when you think about it in a multiplayer setting. And so that's kind of at the heart of it. If you want to avoid being the archenemy, then that means that the whole point of everything that you're doing is to try to make it so that somebody else appears to be way more threatening, way more scary than you. And so picking a bad commander is actually a great strategic choice for that reason. So you said there are some other commanders that you'd like to mention as well, Kazul being one of them. What are some other ones that you're talking about? By the way, Kazul here is ranked 810.
Yeah, isn't that insane?
Big difference. And like I said, I would pick Kazul every day of the week. Yeah, I do have a little bit of experience because I did have a Queen Marquesa deck, and I did end up feeling like people were just attacking me for that reason. And it made me think about why. I'm playing a great commander, yes, but everybody is playing a great commander. What's the difference?
Yeah.
And the difference was I had played other commanders that were not that popular. Maybe for hipster reasons. I don't really feel like I'm a hipster, but I felt like I was doing it because I thought it was cool. I loved it when an opponent played something I've never seen before. It just was so much fun. So I kind of wanted to do that to my opponents too. And with Queen Marquesa, I said, people play the commander, but the deck idea is probably a little different than what other people are doing. Instead of stealing, creatures and then attacking with them, I'm going to let you keep your creatures, but they still have to attack somebody else. So it was kind of like theft, but with extra steps. And I'm a big fan of theft. I don't know why, but I love stealing creatures. So Queen Marquesa really felt like right up my alley. And in the end, I just lost pretty much every game that I played with that commander. Even though the deck itself wasn't bad. It was just the commander was super scary. Interesting, right? And I think one of the ways this gets hidden is that there's such a big contrast in the haves and the have-nots when it comes to popularity of commanders, that there are so many people playing the haves that they, you'll sit at a table and let's say you're playing really popular commanders. It's very uncommon for somebody not playing one of those, right? You'll find yourself in a constant pattern of everybody playing one of the top 200 commanders, which I think right now there's 1,200 commanders, so top 17% or so in terms of popularity. But yet those decks can maybe comprise 70, 60% of the total decks in the format. And so playing with opponents that are all playing a popular commander, you won't really see a benefit to not playing a popular commander because each game that you're playing, somebody with a popular commander wins. But if you try this strategy of building a good deck with a bad commander, you'll find that in a lot of situations, by the time you decide, your goal to start popping off, at that point, people have no more spot removal. They have no more counter spells. They haven't really been attacking you. So taking you out of the game is not really an option either. Bull wipes have happened. Now they've got 0 cards in hand or 2 or 3. It's a lot of stuff that happens here. There is another element here where we can go and talk about ramp and about card draw. And people will tend to want to play ramp and card draw that they can cast on turn 2 or they can cast, get cards immediately, get the ramp immediately, do all this stuff. And in a lot of ways, I feel like this is another element that we could talk about where late game optimization actually can make the game easier for you to win than early game optimization. If I get a Mana Crypt, and this was actually, again, back to the Queen Marquesa, I had Mana Crypt in there. I had spent, I don't remember how much I had paid for it, maybe like $30-$40, but I bought myself a Mana Crypt. I put it in that deck and I was so excited. And part of the reason I put the Mana Crypt in there was because I noticed that it was kind of the worst deck of my collection. Like it was struggling the most. So I had a Mana Crypt, I put it in there and it made it worse. Every time I got the Mana Crypt out, I got dealt damage, I got attacked more. And it made me even a bigger threat, And so that's kind of the element that's part of the reason why I don't really play Mana Crypt in any of my decks. I do have a deck that wants my own life total to go down. And even there, I don't play Mana Crypt. It's a Selenia deck, but we can go into that. Yeah. But anyways, you mentioned Kazul. What are some of the other commanders that you were thinking about doing that you maybe think the audience will say, yeah, these are bad commanders?
So this is by statistics, a more popular commander. It's Shirai Shizo's Caretaker. And it costs 4 and a black. It's a 2/2 spirit. Whenever a creature with power 1 or less is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may return that card to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step if Shirai is still on the battlefield. And this can be seen as bad because why would you limit yourself to just power 1 or less? That's terrible, is what some people can think.
Yeah, absolutely. And what ranking is that on EDH Rec?
197.
Yeah, that's still in the top 200. But yes, I think a lot of people have probably never even seen this commander before. Maybe some have, but some people probably haven't. And again, another element that makes this less popular probably is the fact that it's monocolored. People tend to not like monocolored. Kind of like with Kazul we were talking about. Shirei kind of falls into that same category. I have seen kind of 2 styles of Shirei, whereas I, to be honest, I've never seen a Kazul deck, although it is super cool and you really should build it. I think that would be super awesome. But I have seen 2 like elements of Shirei. There's like one build where it's aristocrats and you're like sacrificing creatures to get value, and you're doing that. Yeah. You're not really doing anything specific, but you're just trying to accrue value with sacrificing. Yeah. The other strategy, and it may be more popular on EDH Rec, is the Shadowborn Apostle strategy. So Shadowborn Apostle, it was in some core set. I want to say M11, M12. I'm totally guessing though. It's a 1-drop 1/1 that says you can play any number of this card in your deck. And then it has an activated ability. You pay a black and sacrifice 5 other Shadowborn Apostles, so a total of 6. Search your library for any demon card and put it onto the battlefield. So that's a pretty popular card that's used with Shirei because you can keep sacrificing Shadowborn Apostles and keep getting out free creatures. No. Yes. So that's, again, the more popular version, I think, of Shirei, and that's probably contributing to why it's number 103 or 109. If it weren't for that one card, this would be in the 400s, easy.
Yeah, I've never built with Shadowborn Apostles, but that would increase the price of the deck a lot.
Yes, it's also very expensive when you have to buy a ton of cards
30
with all the same name. Yeah. However many you want to go for. Then you got to buy the what's that? Not Thornbite Staff. The other thing from Lorwyn. Ripple. No, it's not Lorwyn. It was Ice Age. The one with Ripple 4.
You look at the top 4.
What's that card called? It doesn't matter. Anyways.
Thrumming Stone?
Yes. Thrumming Stone. That's it. Thrumming Stone. Yes. So you have to get that one too. And a lot of people like strategies like that. It's one of those things that's like it kind of bends the rules of EDH, which is nice. I don't mind it. Like I don't have any issue with that. I think that's cool. But that is what's making it really popular. And as a result, because there are people who play that either in content or, people know friends that play that, I think that's going to make it kind of a scary commander too. People are going to see Shirei and they're going to think, "Oh my god, I gotta worry about this deck getting out free 8 drops." Getting them out there, and then they're going to bring them back and get more. And it's like, it's a whole headache, So that's going to be one element that's going to make things a little bit harder and a little scarier. Aristocrats is one of those types of decks that it feels like every good possible commander that could be done for Aristocrats, like someone has found a way to make it really busted, and it's gotten really popular as a result. I used to have one I had with Krav and Regna, partners from Battle Bond. I really liked Krav as a way you could pay 1 black mana, sacrifice any number of creatures, and then I think you gain life, or I don't know, but you draw that many cards. That's the important part.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, and so that was something that I wanted to do for a white-black Aristocrats deck, and it was super, super good. And since then, a lot of people have kind of caught on, and I've kind of left that deck to the side. But yeah, Aristocrats, it feels like it's really tough to do a deck with that. If you wanted to do a Shadowborn Apostle deck, you could definitely pick another commander that's going to be more low profile. And again, low profile commanders, bad cards, I think are way better. If I had to choose, let's say I have a limited budget. I've got a budget of, let's say, $100, and I want to build a good deck. My main goal is to spend that money mostly on the 99. Whereas I think a lot of other budget players, they think if I can at least spend it on a really good commander, that way I'm getting the most use out of my money because I'm seeing that commander every game. I can play that commander every game. But the problem is the last thing you want to do if you have a really strong commander is also have a really weak 99. That's like the worst combination because you're telling your opponents, I've got a scary deck, and then you can't back that up. If you've ever, looked into drafting, and you probably have, a lot of people are more interested in limited than I am personally. But one of the things that I know about limited is it's all about picking up signals from other players and sending signals to other players when you're in packs 1 and 3, where you're telling opponents, this is the colors that I want to play. Don't play those same colors. And then you're kind of listening from other players. Those are the colors that they're playing. I got to play something else if I want to make sure that I have good options for my deck. Same thing in Commander. Your commander is signaling to your opponents the strength of your deck. You don't want to have a strong commander and a weak deck. The best case scenario is you have a weak commander and a strong deck. Again, within limitations, you don't want to break any parameters set up by Rule 0, but staying within those parameters, you still want to have a deck that can compete. I want to kind of talk about that third one, and then I have a little bit of an interesting story, I guess you could say. So what's the third commander that you wanted to look into?
So this is an obscure commander that I learned about, I think, last year. It's called Blind Seer.
Oh! Go ahead.
It's like the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
It costs 2 and 2 blue. It's a 3/3. I don't know its creature type, but it says legend. It's probably a wizard.
I think it's a human
for
wizard.
For 1 and a blue, target spell or permanent becomes the color of your choice until end of turn. And so normally they're like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen, but when you pair this with something called Douse, which is an enchantment for 2 and a blue, you can pay 1 and a blue to make target spell red, and that way you're paying 4 mana consistently to just
counter target red
counter
spell?
spells.
Yeah. It's pretty insane the amount of value you can get with Blind Seer. Again, monocolored, so people are like, I think a lot of people who like the color shifting strategy, it's a very, very obscure strategy. Very few people play anything with that. But I think the most popular commander for that is Momir Vig, Simic Visionary. It's a pretty popular commander. It may not be as popular as it was in the past, but it's a 5-drop Simic commander from, I think, the original Ravnica block. And it has 2 abilities. It has one ability that says whenever you cast a green creature spell, search your library for a creature card, put it on top of the library. Well, you shuffle and then put it on top of the library. And then the other ability says whenever you cast a blue creature spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature, you can put it into your hand. So the way this works with that color shifting strategy is you shift the ability on Momir Vig from blue to green, so that every time you cast a green creature spell, you draw a new creature spell. So if you have something like, for example, Tangle Root, which says whenever you cast a creature spell, add 1 green, and you're also playing a bunch of like 1-drop elves, for example, you can just churn through your whole deck, get all the elves onto the battlefield. You can then maybe put something that can give them haste. Let's say you happen to find Surrak, Dragonclaw on top of your deck. You can put that and give 1 creature haste. If you give that 1 creature, the 1 creature you give haste is that Crashing Drawbridge that taps to give all your creatures haste. You can give them all haste, make a lot of mana with your elves. I mean, you can really just get into a crazy, crazy value pile, which is why Momir Vig, even if it's not that popular, is still something that I look at and be like, okay, I know this deck is going to be able to do some crazy things out of nowhere. It's scary to me for that reason. Whereas Blind Seer, I'm actually okay with it. If somebody's playing Blind Seer, I'm like, dude, I'm so excited to see what's in your deck. I think that's going to be super cool, So Blind Seer, I would pick over Momir Vig. Kazul, I would pick over Queen Marquesa.
Yeah.
These bad commanders are really smart choices for picking for your commander. The story I wanted to tell you is a little bit of my, history going through the format. Because when I first started, the first commander I built was Braid's Conjurer Adept, mono blue commander that allows everybody to put stuff onto their battlefield. And people would beg me to come play with them because they had such a blast playing that deck. I didn't win with it very often. I was also a new player, but I didn't win with it very often. And it was just people just loved playing against that deck. It did something new. It did something interesting. The commander was not that big of a threat, even though I had Blightsteel in there. I could get a Blightsteel or a big Eldrazi out into the battlefield for free. People still loved playing it. Now, that said, they did try to remove Braids as much as possible. Every game, I had to feel like I can't cast it until I have 6 mana because I have to hold up a counter spell so that people can't, I have to protect my commander. It was rough. Right. It was rough, but it taught me something back then that I didn't really fully realize until the story with Queen Marquesa. When you're playing a commander that helps you, the amount that it helps you is the amount that it hurts you according to your opponents. But each opponent is going to try to hurt you for that commander helping you. So if my commander gives me, let's say, 12 points of some mystical advantage, right? And each opponent is also subtracting 12 from me because of that, then I'm going to end up in a net negative. Whereas if my commander is not really giving me that much of a benefit, but it does benefit my deck. It's not like it doesn't do anything. But let's say it doesn't give me that much of a benefit. My opponents aren't going to be spending their negative advantage points on me. They're going to be spending on somebody else at the table. So that's the goal. Always to try to get other people afraid of somebody else at the table. So with all this in mind, where do you feel like you stand when it comes to bad commanders?
I made a professional list about that. So my thoughts are, when it comes to bad commanders, you can find obscure cards, and that's going to lead to probably a more affordable deck, which is like what I really care about as a person. Like a budget deck is really important to me, so maybe Kazul does cost like $6, but the deck's gonna probably be a little bit cheaper because it's a mono red deck compared to Marchesa. Mm-hmm. So
yeah,
you could find that there.
Yeah, a little bit of monetary value in the deck.
Yeah,
due to budget reasons. Awesome. At the moment, I've got 16 decks, and I know it sounds like a lot, but I will be honest with you, I did not spend a lot of money on them because I play on Magic Online. So for people who play on Magic Online, they're kind of more aware of this. And, it's not for everybody. I'm not going to say Magic Online is like the best place for every single person. But I think for a lot of people it is, because you can spend like $10 and get a, top tier, not top tier, but like the deck that you want for a pretty affordable price. And so as a result, I have 16 decks. I, have all those cards obviously on Magic Online, and I didn't spend that much money to get there. And that's kind of the benefit there. I think last time I did the calculation, ignoring what I paid for the cards, now just what they're worth. For 16 decks, I'm paying the same amount as somebody spent on 2 or 3 decks of like the average price. So not even budget decks, it's just like average price decks. So it's really a huge help when it comes to the wallet. It takes a little getting used to, and I won't say, like I said, it's not for everybody, but I think it's for a lot more people than people assume. But yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think this is kind of an element where you can use it to think about a different way to play. How am I affecting my opponents when I play this card? Is it making me win the game, or is it making me lose the game because it's so scary? Yeah.
I didn't even think of that element. Like, just when I thought about these bad commanders, I was just thinking, it's just a little more creative than the normal. Oh, hey, I'm playing Saskia. Which is nothing's wrong with playing Saskia, by the way.
Right.
But it's just combat focused. So maybe with these other commanders, you're just finding weird ways to win and get value.
Right. I think I agree with you. I think there's nothing against anybody who plays Saskia. If you play Atraxa or Muldrotha, power to you. I just don't do it because I think it's harder to win that way. Based on my experience and kind of the way I play. And I think for other people too, it may be possible. But there's a lot of benefits. And I think looking at the strategic benefit is something that not a whole lot of players do. And that's one of the reasons why, even though I stopped doing content creation, I still want to be involved and not only have a voice on Twitter, and I used to on Reddit too, but it's Reddit. And then so on Twitter, I still kind of talk a little bit about what I think, and I try to influence other people that way. And I love collaborating with content creators and contributing to that discussion overall. But for me, and I think for a lot of players too, there are people who, when they build Commander, what they like is to have a deck where they're like, I feel pretty good about this. I don't think it needs any changes. And every single card in here, I feel happy that I'm playing it. I feel like I'm playing good cards, even if other people think it's bad. I like all the cards here. I think they're all good. They're not just like cards that I'm playing because I like the art or something. Which if you do that too, that's fine. But some people like to optimize their decks. That's okay. That's not a bad thing. Some people are saying if you like to optimize your deck, then go play CDH. You're not welcome in Casual Commander. I don't think that's the case. I think Casual Commander has plenty of people who like to optimize their decks. But the difference is optimizing decks in non-CEDH Commander means something totally different than in other formats and in CEDH, where you're not trying to make your deck pop off the fastest and the hardest and the strongest and fight through removal. And I mean, if you want to do that, you can, but that's not what optimal means. That's playing the game on hard mode. Some people like that. That's fine. If you want to really optimize your deck to make it win, the best way to do it is to play the game and try to win and have each opponent at the end of the game think, man, I'm so glad that they came and played the game with me. Going back to that story with the Braves, people loved playing against that deck, even though I didn't win. And that's something that kind of I kept in mind as I went forward. I want to build decks that are really good at winning, that everybody thinks, wow, that was so fun. I want to play a game with that deck again. That's the goal. If you win the game and everybody's like, oh, I don't want to play against them again, then you miss the point. I think you've gone too much on the CEDH side. Trying to go for winning in a fun, not necessarily a fun way, because everybody has fun differently, but winning in a way that's not going to be salt-inducing for as many people as possible, that's my goal. And I hope that's the goal for anybody who's thinking about commander choice in a little bit of a different way after this discussion.
I totally agree with you. And I think one way people can solve this salt issue is with Rule 0. So like if you're playing a board wipe tribal deck, which a little story, I was playing Commander with some of my friends in my LGS, and a guy shows up with his black and white deck, I think it was, but he was playing board wipe tribal and he didn't tell us, which we were so salty. We were just like, we're never playing with this guy ever again, because like we would build up our boards and then just, okay, we got to do this all. Yeah. So I would recommend, if you're doing something like that, just to let the players know, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Mm-hmm. And best of luck.
Yes.
Or just pick another deck.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's another thing to keep in mind too. When we talk about a Rule 0 discussion, we're really trying to find out what the limits of the game are, right? Because if there were no limits, it'd be CEDH. But there are limits. We just have to figure out what those limits are. And each player at the table has their own mind of what their limits, what their limits should be, what they want to be. And they have decks too that fall in different areas within those limits. And so trying to find the right border for the whole game, trying to find that right fence, depending on where everybody wants the fence to be, that's what the point of the Rule 0 discussion is. That's the point of the ban list. That's the point of the rules. That's all these, the same point is to try to find what's considered okay and what's considered out of bounds, right? If I was playing basketball with you and my out of bounds zone is 5 feet within yours, then we're going to have a bit of a salty discussion because you're playing in a way that I think is not fair. And you're saying, no, it's totally fair. So it's kind of a similar element here. We've got to figure out where those lines are. If we try to play basketball without any lines on the ground, that's like the worst possible situation, because who knows where I'm saying out of bounds is and where it's not, right? The point of the lines is like the Rule 0 discussion. Before you can play volleyball, you've got to set up those little strings on the ground if you're playing on like grass or something. That's kind of the point of the Rule 0. We're all agreeing what's considered fair and what's not considered fair. And so in this discussion, CEDH might be like basketball with no out of bounds, right? You have the hoops, the backboard, and that's it. You can play wherever you want. You can go as far away from the goal as from the hoop as you want the basket. So that might be like the way to look at it. But having everybody on the same page with those bounds is important. Now, do we do it by telling people this is where my deck is? Is it okay or is it out of bounds? Or we can go with this is where my out of bounds is. Are your decks okay or are they out of bounds? Right? There's two elements in terms of where you do it. Personally, I like the second side because it allows people to continue to have that bit of flashiness with showing off a cool idea with their deck. But everybody's different, and that's okay, right? There have been plenty of times where I've been in a group and someone starts off, let's talk about their deck so that we don't have a mismatched game. And I'm not going to say, well, I don't want to do it that way. I'll be like, let's do it. And maybe the next game I'll say, hey, why don't we try something a little differently? Everybody talk about where your boundaries are, and we'll all make sure we don't pick any deck that falls outside of those boundaries. So in that game where you mentioned somebody having a board wipe tribal deck, that might be something like this. One person says, hey, I'm cool with anything, just as long as it's not like filled with board wipes. Or somebody might say, I'm cool with anything as long as it's not like filled with counter spells. And then somebody says, I'm cool with anything. Just please do not make the game very chaotic and to the point where I can't win because things are just too hard to keep track of. As long as you don't do that, I'm fine. Everybody can have their little differences. Is that a negative way to start off the game? I don't think so. I mean, is it more negative to say, hey, this is the deck I'm playing, and somebody saying, hey, I don't want you to play that deck? I mean, that sounds pretty negative to me.
Yeah.
Whereas if everybody's saying, this is what I think is like fair and what's not fair, then people are like, I'll pick a good deck, and you'll see what's in it. I'm excited, right? That's kind of the idea. And so that's where I stand for the Rule Zero conversation, which I said we could talk about later. We ended up talking about it now. That's good. But it's related. You know what I mean?
I had never thought about comparing it to basketball and like the lines of outer bounds. That is like, to me, that makes total sense. So like, because you're playing a different game if like, oh yeah, the 3-pointer line's back here.
Yes.
No, it's up here.
Yeah.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, and that's a big key about why Rule Zero is so important. Because without Rule Zero, the only lines you have are the lines set by the ban list. And if the ban list is designed to only be catered to people who have good Rule Zero discussions, like Sheldon Menery of the Rules Committee, he said in a recent announcement, then that means that if you don't have a Rule Zero discussion, the format's not for you. So I maybe have a bit of a different perspective than they do, and that's okay. But again, it does go back to the idea, we have to set those lines. And then if somebody plays something that's outside of my lines, but we didn't talk about it at the table, it's really not okay to get salty about that or to say that it's not fair, because in a way, it's kind of my responsibility to talk about what, before the game starts, what it is that I'm going to be upset about. Right? And just like a deal, if I say, hey, you want to not attack me this turn and I will give you 3 cards in a card draw, I'll target you with my secret rendezvous or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Just like in a deal where you claim, you say yes, I say yes, we both have to stick with it. If you break your deal, that's definitely something that's not okay. Rule Zero is just another element of a deal. Hey, I promise to not do this if you promise to not do this, right? This is my out of bounds. This is my pre-game discussion in a way. So it's all kind of like a deal. And so breaking that pre-game discussion, same as breaking a deal in game. It's the same thing, really, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, like going back to the board wipe tribal guy, like if he had just said, hey, I really want to play this deck, and I don't care if you guys make it I forget, Arch Nemesis. If you guys do that, I'm totally fine. As long as I get to do my thing, then I'll have a good time. And like I think that would have had a better impact and us not be so grouchy about it the next day.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And this is coming from someone who also has a board wipe tribal deck. Mine is Boros, so I don't know if that helps, if that makes things worse. And it's also using a pretty underrated commander, Tajik, Blade of the Legion, 4 mana, 2/2 indestructible. It gets +5/+5. Yeah, it gets +5/+5 if you attack with it and at least 2 other creatures, which is kind of cool. But the idea is like you play all these board wipes, and there's another one too. With the new Kamigawa commanders, if you look at Ow, it's like I think it's like the Dawn something. It's it's the mono white legendary dragon that says when it dies, you can either put counters on all your creatures and vehicles, or you can look at the top cards of your library and get some smaller cards for free onto the battlefield. Well, if you play a board wipe tribal deck there, you can then use vehicles, which are not creatures unless you turn them on, play the board wipes, get Owl into the graveyard or into your command zone because it died, put things onto your vehicles, then you play a creature and turn on your vehicles. So that's another like board wipe tribal commander that somebody could do. But again, it all comes down to what's fair and what's not fair. When I would play games with my Tajik deck, I would ask people, if people didn't do the Rule Zero discussion of what's out of bounds, I would either ask them or say, do you want to talk about our decks? Just making sure that the game is on a fair point. And pretty much in every game, it was just as long as it's not CDH strategies, it's all fair game. That's kind of how most people responded to that. But it is a really interesting discussion talking about Rule Zero and how that works, and bringing it back home to the point on Commander. Even there are some people who will say, I'm okay with anything you're playing as long as it's not a Traxxas or Chlorvolt or one of these other like really, really Yuriko, whatever you happen to put in the blank there. And so that's another element too about choosing commanders. But hopefully this discussion has inspired somebody to look at that commander that they've thought this is pretty bad and say, you know what, it's going to be so much fun and it's going to be good.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And it just brings out that creative side if you really love deck building, just to make it work, just somehow. Yeah,
be a trailblazer, right? You have to find out the way to make it good. That's like half the fun there. Maybe not, maybe even more. I don't know. It depends on who you are.
But. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find you if they want to check out your stuff?
Yeah. So I'm pretty vocal. I don't know if that's the right word, but I'm going to use it anyways. I'm pretty active on twitter.com. So my username is magical__hacker. I had to do 2 underscores because somebody else took my name with 1 underscore. So magical__hacker. I will post stuff kind of with a unique perspective on Commander. Of course, that does get into trouble sometimes, but that's okay. It's part of the fun too. They can find me there. Every now and then I'm on Reddit, but mostly on Twitter. I used to have a YouTube channel too, but if you want to check out those old videos, feel free. But yeah, I'm really excited. This was a fun topic of conversation, and if you ever invite me back on, I will be ecstatic to be back here on the channel.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you all for watching and supporting this channel and listening to this cool conversation. So I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.